Lee Taeho was drinking his morning coffee when the universe changed forever. The quantum communicator in his small office on Luna 7 started making sounds it had never made before. Red lights flashed across the control panel like angry stars. Taeho put down his cup and walked over to the machine. He had been Earth's ambassador to this sector for 3 years now. In all that time, the most exciting message he had received was a trade request for Earth's coffee beans. This was different. The machine was receiving a priority signal from the Galactic Confederation itself. The hologram that appeared made Taeho's hands shake. 3 figures stood before him, each one representing a different alien species. He recognized them from the history books. These were the leaders of the 3 most powerful civilizations in this part of the galaxy. They had been fighting each other for longer than humans had existed. The first figure was tall and covered in dark scales. General Thrakvan of the Corvan Empire. His people were warriors who had conquered hundreds of worlds. The second was pale and thin, with large black eyes. Prime Calculator Zexhai of the Nexari Republic. Her people turned everything into numbers and calculations. The third moved like flowing water. Hierophant Morthul of the Veltar Dominion. His people were older than the other 2 species combined. Human representative. General Thrakvan spoke first, his voice like grinding metal. "We require your assistance." Taeho almost laughed. These 3 species had technology that humans could barely understand. Their ships could cross the galaxy in days. Their weapons could crack planets in half. What could they possibly need from humanity? The war has reached a critical point. Prime Calculator Zexhai continued. Her voice had no emotion at all. Current projections show mutual destruction. Within 2.7 standard cycles if hostilities continue, all 3 empires face extinction, Hierophant Morthul added, his ancient voice carrying the weight of centuries. "We have agreed to attempt peace negotiations. We require a neutral mediator." Taeho stared at them. "You want humans to mediate your peace talks?" "Affirmative," Zexhai replied. "Analysis indicates humans are the only species trusted by all 3 factions. You lack the military power to threaten any of us. You also lack hidden territorial ambitions in our contested regions. You are weak enough to be trustworthy," Thrakvan said bluntly. Taeho felt his face grow hot, but he kept his voice calm. "When and where?" "Harmony Station, Sector 7 Alpha." 7 standard days from now," Morthul answered. "Bring your finest diplomats. The fate of 3 civilizations depends on this summit." The hologram disappeared, leaving Taeho alone with his cold coffee and racing thoughts. Within an hour, his small office was crowded with people. Dr. Park Hae-jin had arrived first. She was the Confederation's only expert on alien psychology. Her research papers on cross-species communication were required reading at every diplomatic academy. "This is impossible," Park said, pacing around the small room. "These 3 species have been fighting for over 200 years. They hate each other more than anything else in the galaxy. But they chose us," Taeho pointed out. "There has to be a reason." Captain Kim Minho stood by the window looking out at the stars. He would be piloting their ship to the summit. "Maybe that's exactly why they chose us. We're not part of their history. We don't have old grudges." Park shook her head. "You don't understand. The Corvans think strength is everything. They see diplomacy as weakness. The Nexari only care about logical outcomes. They don't understand emotions or compromise. The Veltar are bound by traditions that are older than our entire civilization." "So what do you suggest?" Taeho asked. "I suggest we prepare for failure," Park replied. "But maybe we can plant seeds for future negotiations." The next few days passed in a blur of preparation. Han So-young, Taeho's assistant, gathered every piece of information about the 3 species. She read battle reports, trade agreements, and cultural studies until her eyes burned. "The interesting thing," So-young told Taeho on the 3rd day, "is that all 3 species used to be allies. Long ago, before humans even discovered fire, they worked together. They explored the galaxy side by side. What happened? Tejo asked. A misunderstanding over a dead world rich in rare minerals. Each species claimed it belonged to them by right. The argument became a fight. The fight became a war, and the war never ended. Station Commander Kang Do-hyun was busy preparing their ship for the journey. The human vessel was tiny compared to the alien dreadnoughts they would be meeting. It had no heavy weapons, no thick armor, just diplomatic quarters and a small crew. Are you worried? Tejo asked Kang as they watched the crew load supplies. Kang shrugged. Every day in space is dangerous, but this feels different. We're not just representing Earth anymore. We're representing the idea that peace is possible. On the final day before departure, Tejo received a message from Earth. The president wished him luck. The message was short, but it ended with something that stuck in his mind. Remember, we're not going there to be impressive. We're going there to be useful. Dr. Park joined him in his quarters that evening. She looked tired from days of research. I've been thinking about what makes humans different, she said. It's not our technology or our strength, it's something else. What? We tell stories. Every human culture, no matter how different, tells stories to make sense of the world. The aliens don't do that. The Corvins record victories. The Nexari collect data. The Veltar preserve rituals. But none of them tell stories the way we do. Tejo thought about this as their ship launched into space. Harmony Station was 7 days away at maximum speed. 7 days to figure out how to bring peace to 3 civilizations that had forgotten how to stop fighting. As Earth grew smaller behind them, Tejo wondered if they were making a terrible mistake. Humans had barely stopped fighting among themselves. Their own history was full of wars and violence. What right did they have to tell other species how to make peace? But then he remembered something his grandfather had told him years ago. The best peacemakers are those who remember what war costs. Humanity remembered. They had fought 2 world wars that nearly destroyed their planet. They had come close to nuclear annihilation during the Cold War. They knew the price of hatred and the value of talking instead of shooting. Maybe that was enough. Maybe that was exactly what the galaxy needed. The ship hummed quietly through space, carrying its small crew toward the most important diplomatic mission in human history. Behind them, Earth continued its slow rotation, unaware that the fate of 3 galactic empires now rested in the hands of a few humans with nothing but words and hope. Tejo looked out at the stars and whispered a prayer to whatever gods might be listening. Tomorrow they would find out if humanity's greatest strength was enough to stop a war that had lasted longer than their entire civilization. The next morning brought new problems. Commander Kang Do-hyun woke up to emergency alerts flashing on his personal communicator. During the night, 2 Corvin fighters had gotten too close to the Nexari fleet. The Nexari had responded by targeting their weapons systems. Only the threat of immediate ejection from neutral space had prevented actual shooting. This is hopeless, Han So-young said as she reviewed the incident reports. They can't even be in the same area of space without trying to kill each other. Ambassador Tejo was already dressed and planning his day. He had spent most of the night thinking about his idea. It seemed crazy in the cold light of morning, but it was still the only plan they had. Get me a meeting with Dr. Yang Ji-woo, he told So-young, and find Engineer Choi Sung-min. I need both of them. Dr. Yang was the human delegation's historian. She had studied every major war in galactic history. If anyone understood how conflicts started and ended, it was her. Engineer Choi was different. He fixed things, machines, systems, problems that seemed impossible to solve. They met in the station's small human quarters. The room was basic but comfortable, with furniture sized for human bodies and air that didn't burn their lungs. I want to try something tonight, Tejo explained. Instead of formal negotiations, I want to invite all 3 delegations to an informal gathering. No official talks, no recording devices, just conversation. Yang looked puzzled. What kind of conversation? Stories. I want to tell them stories about human history, about times when we faced impossible situations and found ways through them. Choi leaned back in his chair. You want to tell alien warlords bedtime stories? I want to remind them that every war has an ending, and sometimes that ending doesn't have to be destruction. Yang was quiet for a long moment. Then she smiled. I know exactly which stories to tell. The afternoon negotiations went as badly as expected. General Thrakvan accused the Nexari of developing illegal biological weapons. Prime Calculator Zexhai presented evidence that the Corvins had been targeting civilian populations. Hierophant Morthul claimed both species had violated ancient treaties that predated their civilizations. Dr. Park Hai-jin tried to guide the discussion toward common ground, but there wasn't any. Every topic led to old grievances and fresh accusations. By the end of the session, 2 security teams had to escort the Veltar delegation out before they challenged the Corvins to ritual combat. This is exactly what I expected, Park told Tae-ho as they walked back to their quarters. Each species sees the universe completely differently. The Corvins think might makes right. The Nexari believe logic solves everything. The Veltar trust only tradition and honor. There's no common language between them. Maybe we need to create one, Tae-ho replied. That evening, invitations went out to all 3 delegations. The message was simple. The human delegation requests your presence for an informal cultural exchange. No agenda, no official business, just an opportunity to learn about each other. Tae-ho expected rejections. Instead, curiosity won out. Maybe the aliens were as tired of failed negotiations as the humans were. The human quarters were rearranged for the gathering. Chairs were placed in a circle, with lighting kept low and comfortable. Engineer Choi had even managed to synthesize beverages that were safe for all 3 species to drink. General Thrakvan arrived first, looking suspicious. His armor was polished, but his weapons were powered down in accordance with station rules. Prime Calculator Zexhai came next, carrying data tablets and looking like she expected this to be a waste of time. Hierophant Morthul entered last, moving, with the careful dignity of someone who had attended 10,000 formal ceremonies. For several minutes, nobody spoke. The 3 species sat as far apart as possible, watching each other with barely concealed hostility. Finally, Dr. Yang Jiwoo stood up. Thank you all for coming. We thought you might be interested in hearing about human history, about times when our people faced impossible choices. Your species is barely 2 centuries old in space, Thrakvan rumbled. What could you possibly teach civilizations that mastered the stars before your ancestors discovered agriculture? Yang smiled. Maybe that's exactly why our perspective might be useful. We remember what it's like to nearly destroy ourselves. She began telling them about the 3 Kingdoms period in ancient Korea. 3 powerful states that had ruled the peninsula, each convinced they were destined to unite the land under their banner. For decades, they had fought endless wars that drained their treasuries and killed their best people. Each kingdom was strong, Yang explained. Each had good reasons for fighting. Each believed victory was possible if they just fought a little longer, a little harder. Prime Calculator Zexhai looked up from her data tablet. What was the outcome? All 3 kingdoms fell. They had spent so much time and energy fighting each other that they couldn't defend against outside invaders. The peninsula was eventually united, but not by any of the 3 kingdoms. It was conquered by a force that had been growing stronger while they destroyed each other. The room was completely quiet. Yang could see the aliens thinking, processing the implications. Engineer Choi spoke next. We have other stories too. About enemies who became friends, about wars that ended not with conquest, but with understanding. He told them about World War II, and how former enemies had become some of humanity's closest allies. About the Cold War, and how 2 superpowers had stepped back from nuclear destruction at the last moment. How? Hierophant Morthul asked, speaking for the first time that evening. How does a species choose peace over victory? By realizing that victory and peace might be the same thing, Tae-ho answered. By understanding that the strongest thing you can do is choose not to use your strength. General Thrakvan's red eyes narrowed. Weakness disguised as wisdom. Is it weak to build something instead of destroying it? Yang asked. Is it weak to leave your children a better world instead of a battlefield? For the first time since the summit began, No one had an immediate answer. The gathering lasted 3 more hours. The aliens asked questions about human history, about how conflicts had been resolved, about why humans seemed to value cooperation over conquest. When it ended, the 3 delegations left separately, as they had arrived. But something had changed. Tejo could see it in their body language and the way they walked. They were thinking about things they hadn't considered before. Commander Kang found Tejo in the observation lounge after midnight. "I've been monitoring communications between the fleets. Something interesting is happening." "What?" "They're not just talking to their home governments anymore. The junior officers from all 3 fleets have been exchanging messages. Nothing official. Just talking." Tejo smiled. "About what?" "The stories you told tonight. They're sharing them with their crews. Apparently, several Corvan ship captains have been asking their historians about ancient conflicts that ended in cooperation. The Nexari are running probability calculations on alliance scenarios. The Veltar are consulting their oldest records for precedents of former enemies becoming allies." "So it's working?" Kang shrugged. "It's too early to tell, but for the first time in 200 years, these 3 species are thinking about something other than how to kill each other." Outside the observation windows, the 3 fleets maintained their defensive positions, but their weapons were no longer actively targeting each other. It was a small change, but it was a beginning. Tejo thought about tomorrow's negotiations. The formal talks would resume, and the aliens would probably go back to making impossible demands. But tonight had planted something new in their minds. Tonight, they had remembered that their enemies were people with their own stories, their own hopes, their own reasons for fighting. Maybe that would be enough to start building something better. Maybe words really could be stronger than weapons. The stars outside looked the same as always, but somehow the universe felt a little less dark. The morning of the 2nd day started with surprising news. Researcher Lim Hye-won burst into Ambassador Tejo's quarters with her tablet in hand, her eyes bright with excitement. "You need to see this," she said, showing him intercepted communications. The alien fleet spent half the night talking to each other. Tejo rubbed his tired eyes. "Talking about what?" "The stories we told yesterday. They're asking their own historians about similar events in their histories. The Corvan military archives are being searched for times when enemies became allies. The Nexari databases are running analysis on cooperation scenarios. The Veltar are consulting their oldest priests about ancient peace traditions." Dr. Park Hae-jin joined them, carrying a steaming cup of coffee. "I've been monitoring the psychological profiles of the alien delegates. Something has shifted. Their stress indicators are down. Their aggressive postures have relaxed slightly. They're starting to think instead of just react," Tejo realized. The morning session began differently than the day before. Instead of immediate accusations and demands, there was an unusual quiet in the conference room. The 3 alien delegations sat in their separate sections, but the hostile energy that had filled the air was less intense. General Thrakvan spoke first, but his voice was more controlled than before. "The Corvan Empire has considered the human perspectives shared yesterday. We have questions about the resolution of human conflicts." Prime Calculator Zexhai activated her holographic displays. "Analysis of human historical data reveals interesting patterns. Conflicts resolved through negotiation show 73.2% better long-term stability than those resolved through conquest." Hierophant Morthol's ancient voice carried a note of curiosity. "Our records speak of a time before this war began, when our 3 civilizations worked together to explore unknown regions of the galaxy. We had forgotten those days." Tejo felt a surge of hope. "Would you like to hear more stories about how cooperation can be stronger than competition?" What followed was unlike any diplomatic session in galactic history. Instead of formal negotiations, it became an exchange of stories and experiences. Dr. Yang Ji-woo told them about the European Union on Earth, how nations that had fought brutal wars for centuries had chosen to become partners instead of enemies, how former battlefields had become centers of trade and learning. Engineer Choi Sung-min shared stories about human space exploration, how the International Space Station had been built by countries that had once been bitter rivals, how cooperation in space had led to breakthroughs that no single nation could have achieved alone. Then something unexpected happened. The aliens began sharing their own stories. General Thrakvan told them about the early days of Corvan civilization, how his people had been prey animals on a hostile world, and how they had learned to be strong to survive. "We fight because we remember being helpless," he said quietly. "We conquered because we feared being conquered." Prime Calculator HFY explained the Nexari evolution from chaos to order. Her people had nearly destroyed themselves through emotional decisions and irrational conflicts. Logic and calculation had saved them from extinction. "We analyze everything because we remember what happens when we don't think clearly," she said. Hierophant. Morthal spoke of the Veltar's ancient past, how they had been the first species in this region to achieve faster-than-light travel, and how that knowledge had made them guardians of younger civilizations. "We follow tradition because we remember what we lost when we abandoned our duties," he said sadly. Psychologist Yoon Sera, who had been quietly observing, finally spoke up. "You're all fighting to protect something precious to your people. The Corvans fight to stay strong, the Nexari fight to stay logical, the Veltar fight to stay honorable, but you're so busy protecting these things that you're destroying them." The room fell silent. The truth of her words hung in the air like smoke. "What do you suggest?" General Thrakvan asked. "What if protecting your values didn't require destroying theirs?" Taeho said. "What if there was a way for all three of your peoples to be strong, logical, and honorable at the same time?" Prime Calculator HFY's eyes lit up with interest. "Explain this concept." Taeho stood up and walked to the center of the room. "On Earth, we have warriors, scientists, and traditionalists. They don't fight each other. They work together. Warriors protect the scientists so they can discover new things. Scientists create tools that make warriors more effective. Traditionalists preserve the wisdom that guides both groups." "Impossible," Thrakvan growled. "Warriors must lead. The strong must rule the weak." "But what makes someone strong?" Yang asked. "Is it just the ability to destroy? Or is it the ability to build something that lasts?" She told them about the great human leaders throughout history. Some had been warriors, some had been thinkers, some had been keepers of tradition. But the greatest had been those who found ways to combine all three approaches. Hierophant. Morthal leaned forward. "You speak of synthesis, of finding harmony between opposing forces." "Yes," Taeho said. "Your three civilizations have different strengths. Instead of using those differences to fight each other, what if you used them to build something none of you could create alone?" The idea was radical. For 200 years, these species had defined themselves in opposition to each other. Corvans were warriors because they weren't calculating like the Nexari. Nexari were logical because they weren't emotional like the Corvans. Veltar were traditional because they weren't reckless like the younger species. But what if they were wrong? What if their differences could be their greatest strength? "The contested territories," Choi said suddenly. "What if instead of dividing them, you shared them?" All three alien delegates stared at him. "Joint administration," he continued. "Corvan, security forces to keep the peace. Nexari efficiency experts to manage resources. Veltar cultural advisors to ensure everything is done honorably." "Preposterous," HFY said automatically. But then she paused. "Although, the efficiency gains from such cooperation would be significant." "Our people would never accept Nexari rule," Thrakvan stated. "Not rule," Taeho corrected. "Partnership. Each species contributes what they do best. Each species benefits from what the others provide." Morthal was quiet for a long time. Finally, he spoke. "In the oldest records of my people, there are references to something called the Great Alliance. 3 species working as one to explore the unknown regions of space. We had assumed these were myths." "Maybe they were memories," Yang suggested, gently. The session continued past the scheduled time. For the first time since arriving at Harmony Station, the 3 species were actually listening to each other, instead of just waiting for their turn to argue. As evening approached, something remarkable happened. General Thrakvan asked Prime Calculator Zexhai a direct question about resource distribution models. Not as an accusation, but as genuine curiosity about how her people solved complex problems. Zexhai responded by asking Hierophant Morthul about Veltar conflict resolution traditions. She wanted to understand how his people had maintained stability for thousands of years. Morthul, in turn, asked Thrakvan about Corvan military organization. How did they build loyalty and unit cohesion across such a vast empire? The humans watched in amazement as three species that had been trying to exterminate each other began sharing knowledge and asking questions. "This is unprecedented," Dr. Park whispered to Tejo. "I've never seen anything like this in my research. Maybe that's because no one ever tried just talking to them like people instead of like enemies," Tejo replied. As the gathering ended, the alien delegates didn't immediately separate into their hostile groups. Instead, they continued their conversations in small clusters. A Corvan officer was showing a Nexari technician something on his tablet. A Veltar priest was explaining something to a mixed group using hand gestures. Commander Kang found Tejo in the observation lounge later that night. "The fleet commanders are requesting permission to exchange cultural databases," he said with amazement in his voice. "Not military intelligence, cultural information, history, art, literature. Are you going to allow it?" "I already did. For the first time in 200 years, these species are choosing to learn about each other instead of how to kill each other." Tejo looked out at the alien fleets. They still maintained their defensive positions, but something had changed. The ships were no longer pointed directly at each other. Small courier vessels were moving between the fleets carrying the cultural exchanges. "Do you think it will last?" Kang asked. "I don't know," Tejo admitted. "But they're talking. Yesterday they couldn't be in the same room. Today they're sharing stories. Tomorrow, maybe they'll start building something together." Outside the window, the stars shone down on three fleets that had come to make war but were learning to make peace instead. And in the center of it all, a small group of humans continued to believe that words could be stronger than weapons. The third day of the summit began with something no one had expected. General Thrakvan requested permission to address the entire assembly, but not about territorial demands or military terms. He wanted to tell a story. Ambassador Tai-Ho almost couldn't believe it when Han So-young brought him the message. He wants to share Corvan history, their military history. "Not just military," So-young replied, reading from her tablet. He specifically mentioned wanting to explain why his people became warriors in the first place. The conference room felt different when everyone gathered. The hostile energy from the first day was gone. In its place was something new: curiosity. The three alien delegations still sat in separate sections, but they were facing each other instead of turning away. General Thrakvan stood up slowly. His massive form still dominated the room, but there was something different about his posture. Less aggressive, more thoughtful. 2 days ago I came here believing that humans were too weak to understand the realities of galactic politics, he began. I was wrong. Dr. Park Hyojin leaned forward, fascinated by the change in the Corvan's tone. The human Yang told us about 3 kingdoms that destroyed themselves through endless war. This story has troubled my sleep, because our own history contains a similar tale. Thrakvan activated a holographic display showing a world of red deserts and jagged mountains. This is Corv Prime, our homeworld. Long ago, my people were not the dominant species on this planet. We were prey. The hologram shifted, showing creatures that looked like the modern Corvans but smaller, weaker, hiding in caves and underground warrens. The skies belonged to the aerial hunters. The plains belonged to the ground stalkers. The seas belonged to the deep swimmers. For thousands of years, we survived by being clever and fast and fearful. Researcher Lim Haiwan found herself holding her breath. This was the first time any Corvan had shared their pre-civilization history with outside species. But surviving was not enough. We learned to fight back. We developed weapons and tactics. We formed armies. Eventually, we defeated all the predator species and claimed our world. Victory through strength, Prime Calculator HFY observed. Yes. But that victory taught us something dangerous. We learned that being strong meant being safe, that power meant survival. When we reached the stars and met other species, we saw only potential threats. We became what we had once feared. The room was completely silent. Even the station's environmental systems seemed to whisper more quietly. Hierophant Morthul spoke into the silence. Your story echoes our own, though from a different path. The ancient Veltar stood and activated his own display. It showed a beautiful world of crystal cities and floating gardens, but overlaid with scenes of devastation. The Veltar were once part of a great galactic civilization. Dozens of species working together, sharing knowledge and culture. We were the librarians and teachers of that age. What happened to this civilization? Engineer Choi Sung-min asked. Pride, Morthul said simply. Success led to arrogance. Cooperation became competition. Knowledge became power to be hoarded instead of shared. The great civilization tore itself apart through internal conflicts. His display showed worlds burning, species fleeing to distant stars, the collapse of a galactic community that had lasted for millennia. We Veltar survived because we retreated to our traditional ways. We preserved what we could of the old knowledge, and swore never to repeat the mistakes that had destroyed so much beauty. But in doing so we became rigid, afraid of change, suspicious of new ideas. You became guardians, Dr. Yang realized. But guards against what? Against the chaos that comes when tradition is abandoned, against the destruction that follows. When species forget the lessons of the past, Prime Calculator HFY had been quietly processing both stories. Now she stood and addressed the room with her characteristic precision. Both narratives contain elements relevant to Nexari history. Observation: all three of our species developed their current characteristics as responses to existential threats. Her holographic display showed the evolution of Nexari society through charts and graphs, but the story they told was deeply emotional. Nexari civilization nearly ended through emotional decision-making. Wars fought for pride instead of purpose. Resources wasted on projects driven by feelings instead of facts. Entire colonies lost because leaders chose what felt right instead of what analysis indicated was correct. The display showed the near collapse of their civilization, billions dying from easily preventable disasters caused by poor decision-making. Logic saved us. Calculation gave us stability. Emotional responses were identified as the primary threat to survival. We became what we needed to become to live. Psychologist Yoon Se-ra had been taking notes throughout all three presentations. Now she looked up with understanding in her eyes. You're all afraid, she said gently. Each of your species faced extinction and developed strategies to survive, but those survival strategies have become prisons. Explain, General Thrakvan demanded. The Corvins learned that strength means safety, so you became warriors. But constant warfare keeps you from ever feeling truly safe. The Nexari learned that logic prevents disaster, so you eliminated emotion. But without emotion, you can't understand why you're trying to survive in the first place. The Veltar learned that tradition provides stability, so you preserved the old ways. But rigid tradition can't adapt to new challenges. The three alien leaders looked at each other with new understanding. For the first time, they weren't seeing enemies. They were seeing people who had made difficult choices to keep their civilizations alive. The war between you isn't really about territory or resources, Tejo said. It's about fear. Each of you is afraid that the other species will force you to give up what keeps you safe. But what if they didn't have to? Yang suggested. What if there was a way for all three species to feel safe at the same time? Impossible, HFY said automatically. Security is a zero-sum calculation. One species' safety must come at another's expense. Must it? Choi asked. When humans first went to space, we thought the same thing. Every nation wanted to be first, to be strongest, to control the most territory. But we learned something important. He activated a simple display showing Earth's International Space Station and the early Mars colonies. We learned that some challenges are too big for one group to handle alone. Exploring space, understanding the universe, protecting our worlds from asteroids and cosmic threats. These things required cooperation, not competition. You're suggesting alliance, Morthul said slowly. I'm suggesting something better than alliance, Tejo replied. I'm suggesting integration, not losing your individual identities, but combining your strengths. The afternoon session continued with the three species sharing more of their histories, their fears, and their hopes for the future. Translator Baek Jae-hyuk noticed something remarkable happening in the room's atmosphere. The aliens were no longer speaking only to the human mediators. They were addressing each other directly. A Corvin officer asked a Nexari analyst about population management techniques. A Nexari researcher questioned a Veltar historian about maintaining cultural identity across multiple worlds. A Veltar priest inquired about Corvin methods for building loyalty and unit cohesion. They're learning from each other, Director Oyunji observed from her monitoring station. For the first time in 2 centuries, they're seeing each other as sources of knowledge instead of just targets for destruction. As the day ended, the 3 alien leaders remained in the conference room long after the session was officially over. They were still talking, still sharing, still discovering that their greatest enemies might actually understand them better than anyone else in the galaxy. Admiral Park Hyun-soo, monitoring from the human fleet, sent a message to Earth that night. Something unprecedented is happening here. The impossible is starting to look possible. But the real test was still ahead. Tomorrow would determine whether words and understanding could overcome 2 centuries of hatred and bloodshed. Tomorrow would show whether 3 civilizations could choose cooperation over destruction. The stars outside Harmony Station continued their ancient dance, indifferent to the small miracle taking place inside the metal flower floating in the darkness. But for the first time in generations, that darkness seemed a little less absolute. The 4th day almost ended in disaster. Everything had started well. The 3 alien delegations were actually working together, drafting preliminary agreements for resource sharing and joint security arrangements. Engineer Choi Sung-min had helped them design governance structures that would let each species contribute their strengths. Dr. Yang Ji-woo had found historical precedents for successful multi-species cooperation. Then the details began to matter. Corvin military forces will maintain primary security responsibility, General Thrakvan declared during the afternoon session. Incorrect. Prime Calculator Zexhai responded immediately. Nexari analysis indicates optimal security requires integrated command structures with logical decision-making protocols. Both approaches violate ancient accords regarding territorial sovereignty, Hierophant Morthul stated firmly. Veltar traditions demand equal representation in all governance matters. Within minutes, they were back to the same arguments that had started the war 2 centuries ago. Who would be in charge? Who would make the final decisions? Who could be trusted with real power? Ambassador Taeho watched in growing despair as 3 days of progress began to crumble. The aliens weren't shouting at each other anymore, but they had returned to their fundamental positions. Each species believed they were the only ones qualified to lead. Han So-young passed him a note. Fleet commanders are requesting permission to begin departure preparations. The summit was falling apart. That evening, Taeho sat alone in his quarters, staring at a blank speech he was supposed to deliver at tomorrow's closing ceremony. What was he supposed to say? That they had tried their best? That some problems were just too big to solve? Dr. Park Hae-jin found him there an hour later. You look like someone who's given up hope. Maybe I have, Taeho admitted. We got them to talk to each other. We even got them to understand each other. But understanding isn't enough. They still can't agree on who should be in charge. Maybe that's the wrong question, Park said quietly. What do you mean? Maybe the question isn't who should lead. Maybe the question is what kind of leadership the galaxy needs. Taeho looked up at her. Go on. These 3 species have been thinking about power the wrong way. They see it as something you take from others. But humans learned something different. Real power isn't about controlling others. It's about inspiring them. That night, Taeho wrote a new speech. The final session was scheduled for the morning, followed by a closing ceremony where the results would be announced to the galaxy. Commander Kang Do-hyun had prepared 2 different press releases, one announcing a peace agreement, another explaining why the talks had failed. The conference room was packed. Representatives from dozens of other species had arrived to witness the outcome. The 3 warring fleets maintained their positions outside the station, weapons powered but not targeted. The morning session began with formal presentations of the draft agreements. Everything was there: resource sharing protocols, joint security arrangements, cultural exchange programs, but the fundamental question remained unanswered: who would have final authority? Implementation requires clear command hierarchy, General Thrakvan insisted. Command hierarchy must be based on logical capability assessment, Zexhai countered. All authority must honor traditional precedents and established protocols, Morthul declared. They were back where they started. Taeho stood up. May I address the assembly? The room fell quiet. Translator Baek Jae-hyuk activated the universal translation system so every species present could understand. 4 days ago, 3 great civilizations invited humanity to mediate their peace talks. Taeho began. We came here knowing we were the weakest species in this room. We have the smallest ships, the fewest weapons, the shortest history among the stars. He paused, looking at each delegation in turn. But we didn't come here to be impressive, we came here to be useful. And in these 4 days, we've learned something important about all of you. The aliens leaned forward, listening intently. You think this war is about strength versus logic versus tradition. But you're wrong. This war is about fear. Each of you is terrified of losing what makes you who you are. Taeho walked to the center of the room where everyone could see him clearly. Corvins, you're afraid that without constant strength you'll become prey again. Nexari, you're afraid that without pure logic you'll make the emotional mistakes that nearly destroyed you. Veltar, you're afraid that without strict tradition you'll lose the wisdom that has kept you stable for millennia. The room was dead, silent. But here's what we humans learned. The things you're afraid to lose become stronger when you share them. Corvin's strength becomes more powerful when guided by Nexari logic and Veltar wisdom. Nexari logic becomes more effective when protected by Corvin courage and informed by Veltar experience. Veltar tradition becomes more meaningful when it helps Corvin warriors and Nexari scientists build better futures. Psychologist Yoon Sera watched the alien delegate's body language change as Taeho spoke. The defensive postures were relaxing. The hostile formations were opening up. You asked who should lead this alliance. Here's our answer: all of you, and none of you. Leadership should go to whoever is best suited for each specific challenge. Sometimes that will be a Corvin warrior, sometimes a Nexari analyst, sometimes a Veltar elder, sometimes someone none of us has thought of yet. Director Oh Yoonji, monitoring from her command center, saw something extraordinary on her screens. The 3 alien fleets were repositioning themselves, not for battle, but into a defensive formation that protected all 3 groups equally. You don't need to choose between your values, Taeho continued. You need to choose to use them together. Imagine Corvin colonies protected by Nexari technology and guided by Veltar wisdom. Imagine Nexari research stations defended by Corvin, fleets and blessed by Veltar traditions. Imagine Veltar temples serving as meeting places where Corvin heroes and Nexari geniuses learn from each other. Admiral Park Hyun-soo, watching from the human fleet, saw the first joint patrol forming. In the distance, Corvin fighters flying escort for Nexari science vessels with Veltar ceremonial ships providing guidance. The galaxy is watching this summit, Taeho said, his voice growing stronger. Other species are waiting to see what you choose. You can show them that war is the only way to resolve differences, or you can show them something better. He looked directly at each alien leader. General Thrakvan, your people have never lost a war because you've never stopped believing in yourselves. Prime Calculator Zexhai, your people have solved every problem they've faced because you never stop analyzing and improving. Hierophant Morthul, your people have preserved their civilization for millennia because you never forget the lessons of the past. These are your strengths, but they're also everyone's strengths now, if you choose to share them. The silence stretched for long moments. Then General Thrakvan stood up. The Corvan Empire accepts joint governance of contested territories, he announced, under the conditions that all security decisions include input from Nexari analysts and Veltar advisors. Prime Calculator Zexhai rose next. The Nexari Republic agrees to resource-sharing protocols, provided that all distribution models incorporate Corvan protection requirements and Veltar cultural considerations. Hierophant Morthul was the last to stand. The Veltar Dominion will support this alliance, with the understanding that all agreements honor the wisdom of the past while building toward a better future. The room erupted in cheers from the observing species. Researcher Lim watched in amazement as centuries-old enemies began shaking hands and exchanging ceremonial gifts. Commander Kang activated the station-wide communication system. To all fleets, the Harmony Accords have been signed. Hostilities are officially ended, but Tejo wasn't done yet. There's one more thing, he said, and the room quieted again. This alliance needs a name, something that represents what you've chosen to become. The three alien leaders looked at each other, then back at Tejo. We propose calling it the Tripartite Alliance, General Thrakvan said. 3 species, 3 strengths, 1 future. Agreed, Zexhai and Morthul said together. And we would like to request that humanity serve as permanent cultural advisors to this alliance, Morthul added. Your people have shown us something we had forgotten, that our differences can be our greatest strength. As the ceremony ended and the delegates began planning their new cooperation, news of the breakthrough spread across the galaxy at light speed. The species that had been watching the war with fear and anticipation now saw something they had never expected. Peace achieved through understanding rather than conquest. On dozens of worlds, other conflicts began to wind down as species pointed to Harmony Station and asked, if they can make peace, why can't we? Tejo stood at the observation window that night, watching the 3 fleets reorganize themselves into a joint formation. Ships that had been built to destroy each other were now flying together, their crews sharing data and stories across species lines. You know what the best part is? Han So-young said, joining him at the window. What? We didn't have to fire a single shot. We didn't have to threaten anyone or force anyone to do anything. We just reminded them that they had a choice. Tejo smiled. Turns out the most powerful weapon in the galaxy is